Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we are cracking open one of the ultimate historical cold cases. Back in July 1937, the absolute most famous female aviator on the planet just vanished. Gone, without a single trace over the massive Pacific Ocean. It's a mystery that has completely captivated us for nearly a century now. So, what we're going to do today is dig past all the rumors. We're looking at the official documents, the verified radio logs, and rock-solid historical research to see if we can finally answer the big question, what actually happened out there? To really wrap our heads around the sheer gravity of this, we kind of need to start right at the very end. Just listen to this actual frantic radio transmission from July 2nd, 1937. "We must be on you, but cannot see you, but gas is running low." That's not some dramatic line written for a movie. Those are Amelia Earhart's real final words. Hearing that immediately sets the terrifyingly high stakes of a disappearance that triggered what literally became one of the biggest, most expensive search operations in human history.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the making of an icon.
So before we talk about how she disappeared, we really need to talk about who she was. Amelia Earhart wasn't just a pilot, she was an absolute pioneer. She went from having this early childhood fascination with flying in the 1920s to just exploding into a global superstar. By 1932, she made history as the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. And then get this, just 3 years later in 1935, she became the first person, period, man or woman, to fly solo from Hawaii to the US mainland. She was constantly, relentlessly pushing the boundaries of what people thought was even possible.
Now, tackling an around-the-world flight in 1937 meant you needed two absolutely crucial things. First up, the plane, a heavily modified Lockheed Electra 10E. This wasn't your average puddle jumper. It was a highly capable, twin-engine machine built for the brutal demands of flying around the globe. But honestly, the second thing was just as important, if not more so. Her navigator, Fred Noonan. Finding a tiny speck of land in the middle of a massive ocean back then meant relying on super complex celestial navigation, using the stars. So Noonan's highly experienced role was literally a life-or-death piece of the puzzle.
Moving on to Section 2, the final flight.
Okay, the setup for this final leg is just incredibly daunting. They are taking off from Lai, New Guinea, and their target, Howland Island. Now, Howland Island is just this tiny, totally flat strip of coral sitting right in the middle of the vast Central Pacific. Aiming for it required absolute dead-on precision. They were pushing the total limits of long-distance navigation and how far they could stretch their fuel. Add in some really rough weather and thick cloud cover, and the margin for error, basically zero.
This sequence right here of those final confirmed radio messages, it's basically a real-life ticking clock. First, Earhart transmits her position. Then, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca, which is actually waiting for her at Howland Island, starts getting these broken, staticky signals. They can hear her, but it seems like she can't hear them at all. Then we get that chilling update. Gas is low, and they physically cannot see the island. One last confirmed message comes through, giving a line of position, and then just total silence.
Which leads us into Section 3, the massive search effort.
250,000 square miles. I want you to just let that sink in for a second. To put that into perspective, imagine trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is the size of a small country. That is the massive patch of the Pacific Ocean that the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard desperately scoured. It was this monumental, wildly expensive operation. But despite throwing basically everything they had at it, not a single physical trace was found, and the official search had to be called off.
Let's dig into Section 4, theories, facts, and fiction.
Okay, let's lay this all out on the table objectively, without any of the wild internet sensationalism. First, the crash and sink theory. The math checks out, radio signals stopped exactly when her fuel would have run dry. The big weakness? We've never found the wreckage. Then you have the Nikamuro castaway idea, which says they crash-landed on a remote atoll. People point to later radio distress calls and some bone fragments found in 1940. But those bones were actually lost later on, and 0 plane parts were ever found there. Finally, the Japanese capture theory. This one is entirely fueled by local rumors of them being taken prisoner. But actually, scratch that, it's totally contradicted by verified flight timelines and a complete lack of any Japanese records.
Look, I know the castaway and capture theories are the ones that get all the flashy documentaries and pop culture attention, but the core takeaway here, the verified historical consensus heavily favors the crash and sink theory. When you look at the cold, hard facts, the fuel consumption rates, the exact timeline of those frantic radio calls, the most logical explanation is simply that the Electra ran out of gas, ditched into the ocean, and sank.
And finally, Section 5, an enduring Pacific mystery.
We definitely aren't searching with 1937 technology anymore. Today, investigators are rolling out the heavy hitters: deep water underwater sonar to basically 3D map the ocean floor, and ROVs, these incredible remote-operated vehicles to search depths humans couldn't even dream of reaching back then. And yet, even with all this futuristic tech, every single time we spot a promising shape down there, it turns out to be a weird rock or just a different shipwreck. Real physical proof of the plane is still completely missing.
So why is this still a total mystery? Well, it's basically the perfect storm. You mix the old-school 1930s navigation tech with the just mind-boggling vastness of the Pacific Ocean. That alone makes finding one single plane nearly impossible. Throw in the complete lack of physical evidence, and you get this massive void. And let's be honest, that void is exactly what our continuing public fascination just loves to rush in and fill.
Grounding this explainer right back in reality, we have to look at what the official sources actually say. When we consult the National Archives, U.S. Navy reports, and peer-reviewed research, the verdict is clear. This case remains officially unsolved. We have some incredibly solid, highly probable theories, for sure, but we definitely do not have a closed case.
Which leaves us with this one lingering thought. As our technology keeps getting better, mapping more and more of the ocean floor every single year, you have to wonder, will the Pacific ever actually give up its greatest secret? Or is Amelia Earhart's final flight just destined to be a permanent mystery of the deep? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, always keep questioning the evidence.